Hi, everyone. This is Nick Burbules. I'm a member of the International Academy of Education. This is another in a series of interviews that we're doing with the authors of booklets in the Education Practices series, a set of short research-based overviews of some really basic foundational questions in educational practice, policy, and reform. Today's guest is Sam Redding. He wrote a booklet. This is one of the first booklets that was published in the Educational Practices series on parents and learning, looking broadly at the relationship between parents and families and the connections between what happens outside the school and how that can support and reinforce learning that is happening in the school. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good. So let's talk about some of the main points of the book. You have, I think, 10 or 12 short chapters that each review the research about different aspects of the relationship between parents and families and learning that takes place in the home as well as in the classroom, and how they can reinforce and support each other. Why don't you take us through some of the main points, and then I have some follow-up questions I'd like to ask you.
Sure. I'm also conscious of the fact that this is now was written about 20 years ago. And so I did a quick review this morning of some of the more current research to see what has changed. And I also looked back and thought how much at the time that was written and still today, it was impacted by the Coleman Report of '66, which really kind of set in motion this concern for what happens outside of school that impacts learning in school. I think it's a topic we haven't completely conquered yet, but we sure put a lot of research effort into it and a lot of program development and tried many things. So in that booklet of 20 years ago, Parents and Learning, I would say this, that my good friend and mentor at then and for many years, Herb Wahlberg, prevailed upon me, keep the focus tight on those two elements, parents and learning, the parent's role in learning, but also how the school can nurture and shape and help parents in that role. And I think in looking at research since that time, I see too that we've strayed away from that kind of central concern in many ways. Not that that's a negative, but it has kind of broadened the scope of interest. So in the booklet, one of the 10, and you might have to remind me of some of these, Nick, as we go through them, but I know one that was prominent is what we call the curriculum of the home. And I first became, I guess, aware of this line of thinking and familiar with the term back in about '84 when Herb himself and Joyce Epstein were both writing seminal works saying, look, what happens in the home, Coleman was right, but it's not just about socioeconomics. It's not just about family conditions. It's also about family behaviors. And most of the behaviors that we think impact school learning and that benefit children are within the reach of families up and down the socioeconomic scale. So we, the curriculum of the home was had to do with such things as, reading to your children, having routines of life, anything from when do we eat and when do we go to bed and when do we study, and talking with kids about their schoolwork. So all of that was what we call the curriculum of the home, the things that happen in the home, basically behaviors between parents and their children that form the habits and attitudes that impact learning in school. So I know that was a strong component of that piece. And from that, we at that time also were looking, okay, so what is the school's role in that? And of course, I mentioned Joyce Epstein and her partnership work, which has been dominant in that field of this, the partnership between the home and the school, and the roles each plays in the child's development and education. And we at that time were trying to describe something called a school community, or community of the school, not the community that's out there somewhere, but the community of people that constitute a school. And by that, we meant the students themselves, their families, certainly, the teachers, the school staff, the volunteers, maybe board members, but people with an intimate attachment to that school and a common interest in each other and in the progress and the development of the children, as we said, in their midst. So some of the other components of that parents and learning had to do with what's a school community look like, what are the roles within it, and how does a school intentionally and by design make some of those things happen. You can read a lot of Coleman into those concepts, because at that time, I and the Academic Development Institute, where I worked at that time as the executive director, we had our work began in the Chicago Public Schools at a time when Coleman and others were reporting research that said, for one, a comparison that public school people don't often like to hear, but the Catholic schools are sure spending a lot less money and getting a lot better results, even now, as they are educating the same kids from the same neighborhoods as the public schools. So it's not a matter that they're getting the cream of the crop. The Catholic schools at that time, in part because of the declining number of Catholics within Chicago as they moved to the suburbs. They had the schools, they had a mission of service, and so they were taking in neighborhood kids and getting better results. And I think Coleman and others were convincing that part of the mystery of that, the magic of that, how you do better with less, was they did a better job of really pulling those parents into a relationship with the school and with each other, with other parents. And that was a key element. And in having a more of a centrality of values of what are we here for, what are we about, what are we all promoting, how do we help each other. So anyway, so there, I think through those 10 components of that piece, you had a lot of that would reflect a curriculum of the home, a lot that would reflect the idea of the community of people that constitute a school. I believe there's some more in there that had more to do probably with literacy and reading, and developing the habits of reading and a desire to read in children, and the home's role in that.
Thank you, Sam. I think that's an excellent overview of some of the main points. It's interesting. James Coleman was one of the founding members of the International Academy of Education. Herb Wahlberg also was a longtime member. I find myself often going back with my students who've never heard of Coleman and reintroducing them to that report. I think it was seminal in both in its content, but also its implications and the reform and the rethinking that I think it triggered. Particularly in helping to focus our concerns or our attention on the fact that not everything that schools can do to support learning is completely within the control of schools. And the way I read your booklet, if this is helpful, I see it as sort of breaking down into sort of 3 clusters of ideas. One is the really important learning that takes place in the home, outside of school, and the various forms that learning takes place. Second, these aren't completely separate. Second, that the conditions from the home that can reinforce and support effective learning in schools, having books around the home, as you say, the conversations and discussions that parents have with kids, whether it's on school subjects or not, that help to support the conditions that foster better learning in the school. And then the third is this partnership idea, the importance that parents and school and educators each be aware of the other's needs and concerns, and that they're both working in parallel towards some of the same goals, and that what is happening in the schools is reinforced and supported in the home. And in all 3 of those ways, the home and, as you say, also community influences can be really crucial in fostering the conditions for school success, or in some cases, the opposite, the ways in which they can interfere with or conflict with school success.
Very true. And once again, when we talked about school community, the community we had in mind wasn't something out there. It wasn't the town or the businesses. It was the community of people that constitute a school. So it's much of a relationship of the parent of one child and the parent of the child who sits next to that child in a classroom. And one thing we found was that that relationship wasn't there in a lot of places. Parents didn't know each other, even though their kids might spend every day of their lives together in a classroom, but just pulling those relationships together was essential. The other thing that I comment on relative to what you just discussed, it's kind of a two-edged sword when we tell educators, you know, it depends a lot on what's happening out there in the home, because what we don't want to do is have a release of responsibility of the school itself, because even if there's nothing happening at home, you maybe have the obligation or responsibility to go the extra mile to make something happen in a classroom. But beyond that, you have a central responsibility with every child in every home as a school to help that home understand what needs to happen within it. And so we always stressed a lot, whenever a school has an opportunity for a connection to a parent, a communication, a relationship, use that opportunity, not just to say, here's what we're doing at school, here's what we're doing at school, but to say, and here's what would really help Johnny or Jill at home, and help educate those parents in what they can do. Because there aren't, I mean, all parents want their kids to do well. A lot of parents have a situation of life that makes finding the time to do that well difficult, but also knowing exactly what the priorities are difficult. Those are things schools can help with if at every opportunity they're educating and supporting parents in that role.
Yeah, that's helpful. So there's three things I'd like to ask you about that in some cases maybe bring some of these issues, as you started, a little bit more into the sort of present context or some present challenges. And let me start with the point that you just mentioned. It isn't only that we have the case where there's alignment and cooperation between schools and families, or B, where the family is sort of checked out, not engaged, but the educator still has to proceed as best they can to work with the kids that they have. I think that there is also C, a third area where some of the actual home influences might actually be interfering with or preventing school success. For example, one of the things you point out in the booklet is the importance and value of having a quiet place to study and work in the home. And I don't need to belabor the point that there are homes in which that doesn't exist. You know, it's a small, cramped, crowded place in which there's too many people and too much noise, too many distractions, TV's on constantly in the background, etc. That's not only not a conducive relationship, it's actually an impediment to doing homework or studying or the things that are going to be conducive to school success. What can educators do in situations where the parent and home environment is actually interfering with their goals or even making their work harder?
Yeah, I think the main lesson that you want to give parents is that we understand that homes are different in how easy it is to provide the things that kids need, or how difficult it is. But regardless of that, kids pretty much need the same things. So one of the things they need is to develop the habit of being able to go to a place where I can study and learn on my own. Call that homework, call it studying at home, call it reading, whatever. All kids need that. So you're at home where it's difficult, kids still need it. What do you do? So I mean, anecdotally, I've told this story 100 times about talking about that with a mom in Chicago who had, I don't know, 4 or 5 kids living in a very small apartment. And she said, here's what I did. She said, well, I got a box that a refrigerator was delivered in. I put it in the corner of a room, I cut a doorway in it. I put a little table and a lamp in it. And I said, here's the rule in this family. When one of you is in there, those of us on the outside will be quiet and honor it. And she said, we stuck with it. And the kids now know when they need to study, they want to read, they go in there, they turn on their light, they study. Those of us on the outside turn down the TV, cut the chatter, are quiet. She said, so we found a way for our family to provide our kids what they needed, even in a very difficult situation. So I think the main thing is don't give up on families that may be in difficult situations. Help them find even creative kinds of ways to deliver as much as they can what the kids need, because what the kids need remains the same, whether it's easy or whether it's hard. It's a similar message that, and it's a hard lesson to convey and probably to receive. But at the time we're saying, well, what about single parents? Well, yeah, it's tough. That means you got twice as much to do. It doesn't mean your kids need any less. And so let's talk about how you can do it. But it doesn't mean doing less for a child. And often, I think it begins at the most basic level with, we said if every child had a caring adult who sat down with them, looked them directly in the eyes and said, tell me about your day, not let me tell you what you need to do, but tell me about your day, it would do wonders. And I also know how difficult that is. I mean, I raised 4 kids, and I know the times when the kids are in and out the door, and you barely, can grab one by the seat of the pants and set them down to say, tell me about your day. But that point of contact between a parent and child is really elemental and critical, and something that is within the reach of every family.
That's fantastic. I love that anecdote. And, it shows how some of these issues do interact with issues of socioeconomic class, poverty, single parent families. Obviously, those conditions are not fair and equitable in our society. And some parents and families do struggle with special burdens that are not problems that they're making. The second topic or theme I wanted to ask you about is, it's not new, but it seems as if it's heightening, at least in this country, and that is actual opposition to some of the goals of schools from parents and families, an actual conflict between curriculum material and subject matter that the school wants to teach and topics or issues or perspectives that parents want or don't want their kids exposed to. And I think, again, it's not a new topic, but it seems as if those conditions are getting more challenging now as parents and other groups become even more assertive in saying, we don't want our kids exposed to particular books or specific ideas or particular perspectives on American history. How do you view that issue in the present context?
I think as much as we can say that parents have changed, maybe in being more demanding in what they expect to happen in schools, I think schools have also, in many cases, strayed into kind of ideological directions that are away from why we're here as a school and what we're intended to do. And so there's a natural conflict there. Our whole notion about a school community was putting parents and teachers together and saying, look, we got kids in common. What is it we want for them? That's easier said than done. And I remember in one of the first things that I had written of kind of a site-based model for how you do this, we talked about kind of collectively arriving at common values. Just using that term set up red flags for some parents. They came right back at us and said, look, values, that's something we do at home. Well, kind of, but you don't want a school that says it has no values. So are there some values that are so central to schooling that they should be easily adopted, adhered to, and believed in by both families and schools? And so some things are relatively academic. We want all kids to be able to read and read well and enjoy reading. We want kids to develop study habits and whatever. These things are kind of universal, that would be true whether the student is generally a very good student, not a struggling student, grade level, whatever, those things would be true. But there are also certain, I think, core values around respect for other people, respect for themselves, responsibility. Those are kind of values that I don't think they can argue a whole lot about. But I think sometimes that if schools try to get beyond some of those basics that are kind of obvious and would be ones that you could hold to, whether you're a parent or a teacher or whatever, they set themselves up for criticism. And this might be something that really is going to be, I appreciate sometime your thoughts on this, because it looks to me like this is the cleavage that is not going to be easily healed. And it certainly is ammunition for greater choice of schools. I mean, no matter what you do as a school, there's some families that say that's not for us. And right now they may not have an out. Maybe they should have an out. And so I think it probably lends to that argument.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Sam. I don't think I have the key to unlock this particular dilemma, but I would say that choice, I think here's what I would say about what you just said. I think we can think about choice within a school as well as choice of a school. I've always believed, frankly, as a progressive, as someone politically way left of center, I've always felt that we should be adopting the discourse of school choice and not only leaving it up to more conservative Milton Friedman voucher programs and other things. You mentioned, for example, the efficacy of religious schools for many students. So non-public private school, charter schools, voucher schools. I actually think that progressives have made a mistake by seeing school choice as only a kind of neoliberal or conservative reform. When I was in college, the first school choice programs I learned about were from progressive school movements. But even for kids within a school, I think we can talk about choice for students and their families. And I do think that in some cases there ought to be latitude for parents to opt out of certain curricula or subject matter that conflict with their religious values or their personal values. And I think schools that don't accommodate those concerns, I think, are going to see increasing conflict because, as you say, parents, for a variety of reasons, not all of which I like or support, but for a variety of reasons, parents are becoming much more demanding. I think this is another way in which I think there has to become some level of accommodation and compromise, even given disagreement about some of these values. And if schools don't accommodate them, then I think there will be greater pressure for parents to seek alternatives.
Right, and I also agree that the notion of charter schools, which has come to be seen as something almost outside of the public realm, although they are public schools.
Right.
But I mean, 20 years ago, we worked with Appleton, Wisconsin, that started in-district charters. So if you, a principal and some teachers and parents had a notion for operating a school in a little different way than others, they could go through a process, still part of the district, but went different directions. And by doing that more than once, you start to get options for parents, even within a district. And so I think there are ways to get about it, but I think there has to be some kind of escape valve for legitimate differences that families might have. And I guess the problem is arguing over what's legitimate, but I think there could be more leeway than there has been in a very cookie cutter kind of approach to schooling.
Yes, thank you for that. So the third topic I want to bring up, which is a big one, we could have started with this and spent the whole time just on this, is the impact of new technologies on these issues. This booklet is, I think, more than 20 years old, and one of the things certainly we've seen since the 90s is the transformation of learning in schools and outside schools, not always for the better, but by the conditions and affordances of new technologies. So there's different kinds of homework now. Teachers can have a website that they post school projects on that parents can access to see directly some of the things that kids are doing in school. Obviously, the channels of communication and collaboration between teachers and parents don't necessarily require only just once a year or twice a year parent-teacher conferences, but could involve email or Zoom or other ways of interacting. I'm just curious about your views about how this larger picture of creating teacher, parent, family, community partnerships looks different in the context of 21st century technologies.
Well, but before I forget it, because I really want to make a point of this, I just very recently read an article by Kathy Fox from University of North Carolina, Wilmington, that was published in the School Community Journal, I think in the most recent issue, where she looked at changes in teacher attitudes and practices, having experienced the remote learning of COVID, and said that for many teachers, it gave them insights into homes in a positive way. It opened up opportunities for them. They saw what could be done to influence in constructive ways what's happening at home. And I don't mean only if you're in a remote learning opportunity, but I think because those teachers had that lens to real homes, it altered their perceptions to some extent, but it also caused them to be more creative about the possibilities. So I would recommend that Kathy Fox article. Otherwise, I would say these two things. And I edited a book, not too many, just a few years ago, on handbook on personalized learning. So I was getting into this whole topic at that time. I think it's wonderful that what technology has done between schools and homes. And I talk to parents and see how they can follow their kids. I don't mean just following their grades, but following their completion of work, comments back and forth with teachers. It's so much more immediate, much more able to be interactive when it's done well. And I know that teachers have to be guarded about the time, but I think teachers have learned to do that well. I think that whole kind of communication is great. I think there's opportunities for home-based learning on the part of students and on the part of parents that schools can organize and orchestrate, that can be done tremendously with the help of technology. I'm moderately sanguine about technology in the classroom. I think it's got potential and does some things well. But even at the time that I was writing that book, I was trying to strongly cling to an advocacy for the importance of the person of the teacher and the bond between a teacher and a student. And that is something incredibly special, and particularly in our history of public education, that I would want to be sure doesn't get squeezed out. So to see kids at a computer terminal for several hours a day and then going home and on a computer again, there are some things happening in that regard that are not good, but there are certainly possibilities for well-constructed, well-controlled, even programmed learning that's computer delivered, I think, that are proving fruitful.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good point to end on. Sam, it's a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing this project with us. Thank you for the conversation. And thank you for your thinking through some of these questions with me.
Thank you. Appreciated the opportunity.